Hey guys, how are we doing? It's Tyler Newman here, and in this video I'm going to go through how you can profit from properties that you don't even own. Now, this is going to be a new concept for some of you. Some of you may already be familiar with the concepts we're going to discuss. And one of the biggest misconceptions people have when they first enter the property investing world and begin to learn more about property is that they believe you need to be buying property and owning property in order to make money from it, but that's not entirely true. And so the concepts I'm going to share with you today come from a standpoint of being an operator, not an owner. And this is becoming more of a familiar way of doing things in the business world. So if we look at companies like Airbnb and we look at Uber, Airbnb provide a huge amount of rooms and accommodation, yet they don't own any of the assets. They don't own any of the rooms, any of the accommodation. They're an operator, not an owner. And it's the same with Uber. They have thousands and thousands of cars and drivers, yet really they don't own the cars. A lot of the drivers are self-employed. So again, they're an operator, not an owner. So how does this relate to property? How can you profit from properties you don't own? Well, the concepts I'm going to share with you today, the strategy is called Rent to Rent, which is broken down into Rent to HMO, and I'll explain what that stands for in a second, or Rent to Serviced Accommodation. So let's start with Rent to HMO. Well, what is a HMO? A HMO stands for a house of multiple occupancy. Sometimes you may have heard it referred to as a house share, and it's where in a property the rooms are split into individual units and the property is rented out on a room by room basis. Sometimes also called a multi-let rather than a single let. Now, a house rented out as a HMO, as multiple units, as multiple rooms, generates more cash flow than a property that is just a single let. And that's because the house broken down into parts, each part is worth more once it's combined. And so what you can do is you can rent a property from a landlord and pay them a fixed, a guaranteed rent every month. You can then maximize the rental income of that property by converting it into a HMO, and then you can keep the profit in between. Now, let me give you some example figures so you can see really what is possible with this. But before I do that, whenever I share this and teach these methods to people that aren't familiar with this, the first question they ask is, well, isn't that subletting, and isn't subletting illegal? Well, first of all, subletting is only illegal if the landlord isn't aware it's happening. If it's agreed in writing, which it will be if you're doing this, it's perfectly legal, and landlords are happy for you to do this. So the type of landlord that is open to a rent to rent is a landlord that's typically tired of tenants. They've had bad experiences in the past. They're just fed up and they want a totally hands-off experience. So you can help them by offering them the guaranteed rent. It then becomes a hands-off experience for them because you manage the property for them. And then you maximize the income by converting either to a HMO or a serviced accommodation, which we'll explain again shortly. And you can keep the profit in between. So let me give you some numbers. Let's say a 3-bedroom property. It rents out to one family as a single let as for £800 per calendar month. And so you approach a landlord, and if you think there's potential for that property to be converted into a HMO, you can say to that landlord, I'm happy to pay you £800 a month, ideally a little bit less, maybe like £700 per month. In this example, we'll stick with 800 just because there's other benefits you're offering them, like it's more hands-off, don't have to worry about it, don't have to deal with tenants. Sometimes you may spend a bit of money improving and adding value to the property, but let's stick with £800 per month. Now, that 3-bedroom property, the 3 bedrooms upstairs you can convert into 3 rooms, and then downstairs there may be 2 living rooms that you can convert into rooms. And if you've ever been to a HMO or a house share or sometimes students' accommodation, you'll have seen properties laid out like this. So let's say in this example, each of the 5 rooms rents out for £450 per month. Now, 5 times 450 is 2,250. And when it's a HMO, you'll also be responsible for paying the bills as well. So in this example, let's say the bills are £450 per month. You're going to be receiving, as the operator, £2,250. Now, you're going to be paying the landlord £800 in rent. You're going to be paying £450 in bills. And so your profit every single month is going to be £1,000 per month. And this is totally possible. These are really realistic figures, and there are hundreds, well, thousands of people doing this at the moment. And £1,000 profit per month every year is £12,000 per annum, which is a lot of money. And over 4 years, if you operate this property for 4 years, that's £48,000. And that this one property is bringing in that you don't even own. And if we think this property in the first year brings in £12,000, and if we say the setup cost is £3,000, which again are realistic figures, it's entirely possible to find HMOs that cost you £3,000. In fact, it's entirely possible to find rent-to-rent deals, rent-to-HMO deals that cost nothing to set up. But let's just say it costs £3,000 to set up, and you've got to put £3,000 down at the start. In the first year, you're going to bring in £12,000, so you're going to break even by month 3. And in the first year, you're going to have a 400% return on investment. So that's one of the ways you can profit from properties you don't own with the rent to HMO model. But what about rent to serviced accommodation? Well, it's very similar. And if you're unfamiliar with the term serviced accommodation is essentially properties which are like hotels, but they just provide a bit more amenities, like you've got the laundry, you've got a kitchen. And if we go back to Airbnb, if you've ever stayed in an Airbnb, that's serviced accommodation. So what you can do is you can rent a property from a landlord, and instead of converting it to a HMO, you convert it to serviced accommodation. And again, if we use the same figures, you pay the landlord £800 per month, and you may charge guests to stay at this property £100 per night. Now, the average stay, it might be 3 nights, 5 nights, 15 nights, depending on the area, the location, and the type of guests you're trying to attract. But you can see immediately at £100 per night, you don't need a huge occupancy rate in order to make significant profits. Now, with serviced accommodation, there's a little bit more management that's involved. There's sometimes a little bit more setup costs, but often the revenue that the property brings in is much, much higher, so they're far more lucrative. And so really, this is going to be a new way of thinking for a lot of people, and these are totally possible for anyone to do. And it's obviously a skill, being able to know how to find these sort of deals and calculate them and analyze them. But as an operator, you can make really, really lucrative cash flow compared to being an owner. So if you want to learn more about rent to rent, I've got a 90-minute free training. The link is in the description below this property, where we're going to cover it in a bit more detail, as well as many other strategies where you can profit from properties without having to buy them, by doing joint ventures, and then really how you can end up growing a hugely profitable portfolio in the long run. So if you guys like that video, if that's opened up a new way of thinking to you, hit the like button, subscribe. I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you on the